This is a gentlelady from Pennsylvania. Is that right, Ms. Dean?
Yes.
All right, Ms. Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all our testifiers for being here today. We benefit from your experience and your service and your knowledge and your heartbreaking family experience. You know, before I ran for Congress, I was a professor. For 10 years, I taught at LaSalle University in Philadelphia, teaching writing and rhetoric and ethics. And that's why I can't help noticing the words so often used by my Republican colleagues when we're talking about both of these tragic issues. Words like hordes, invasion, crisis, open border. It's purposeful. They want the American people to be scared. They want us to feel threatened. They want to create divisions because othering people makes it far easier to mistreat them. The reality is there is no invasion. There are no hordes of invaders. Our borders are not being overrun by dangerous criminals. But we do have a broken immigration system. At the same time, we are suffering with an extraordinary, deadly drug problem in our country. Mr. Dunn and Mrs. Dunn, Ms. Janelle, my extraordinary, heartfelt sympathy to you on the loss of dear Noah, poisoned by fentanyl, as you have written here in your testimony. My family knows a little bit about drugs and poisoning, but from a different perspective, my son is a recovering addict. And it is by the grace of God that he did not run into the deadly fentanyl that would have taken his life. But we must be able to talk about these things honestly and not conflate them, as my colleague just said. There's a difference between the facts and the rhetoric, between wanting to solve these problems or just trying to make people afraid of them. The fact is, 90% of fentanyl, heroin, and meth seized in this country is captured at ports of entries. Just about everybody who has spoken to has said this. This means that drugs are being brought in through normal channels, not on the backs of families crossing at remote parts of the country, the vast majority I'm talking about. I'm sure it's not 100%. In fact, CBP reports that drug cartels are now recruiting Americans to bring fentanyl into this country, not undocumented immigrants. And we have a horrific problem. Like your dear Noah, we are losing more than 100,000 people a year to overdose. More than 70% of those fentanyl. I wear this band for the son, a 24-year-old son who died of an overdose, fentanyl poisoning. And sadly, it's not one anymore. This band now represents at least a half a dozen in my community whose children have lost their lives. But let's get serious about it. Let's stop demonizing the immigrant who comes and asks for help. Judge Samanello, I understand, and I have been to El Paso, to the port of entry. It's the second busiest border crossing in the United States. You interact with a large number of these people who are, and they're people seeking safety and humane treatment. Can you tell us just a couple snippets of why they are coming across?
And I said earlier, a large number that you hear is that they were in their country, they were abused, they try to defend themselves, and they get targeted. That's one big category, where they're just trying to do the right thing in their own country, but their own country rejects them, and then they target them. That's a big part of it. And a lot of it, like I said, is just, it's not, the economy plays a second part of it. Obviously, the economy is worse, and that's not a reason to come to our country because of the economy. But they're really driven by the fact that they can no longer live in their communities.
And we know that we've seen these numbers for a large number of years, not just under the Biden administration. I think in your testimony you wrote at least the last 4 years you've had increased numbers.
Absolutely.
Can you speak to what you also said in your testimony, which is this, what I'm so concerned about, which is the false racist narrative that is being promoted here today and is promoted day after day here in Congress?
Well, you know, if anybody's concerned with that, it's us. I mean, that narrative was picked up by a shooter that, you know, at the Walmart situation. And we hear that, and it concerns us as a community when you say racism and invasion and all of these things. It makes our community extremely nervous. because then we might get targeted for being that community and for being humanitarian. And so I do ask for this words to be settled in a different way. You don't need to say invasion and, all of these things that are happening across the border. We're a community that works really hard. We're very privileged with what we have, and it's just very concerning when we hear this because we don't know if we're going to be targeted because of these comments.
And I know my time is up. I thank all three of you for your service. And Mr. Dunn, I thank you for your wish to educate people about the extraordinary dangers to our children.
The gentlelady's
Thank you.
time's expired.